Welcome to Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. My name is James Navé. Thank you ever so much for tuning in. Today I am bringing you a show I recorded a couple of weeks ago in Jonesborough, Tennessee at the National Storytelling Festival. I was staying with a friend of mine, and she had a number of house guests, as things tend to happen in storytelling festivals. Folks gather and bunk up in the same houses. This happened to be a really rather large house, so we were quite comfortable. And one of the guests staying there was a storyteller named Lo Ziv. And I particularly liked engaging with Lo because she said, I'm a theologian, I'm a storyteller, I'm a teacher. And I said, what do you do for your day job? She said, I'm a software engineer. And the reason I'm a software engineer is because I've studied ancient languages, and writing code in ancient languages are very similar. So when she said that, I thought, wow, I need to interview this woman. And so I did. We began very simply by me asking her to tell us a bit about her involvement with storytelling. So here goes. Tell me what it is about storytelling that brought you to Jonesborough to the Storytelling Festival.
Many years ago, there was a contra dance weekend that happened here in Jonesborough called Mountain Madness. And there was a big storytelling event that happened at the same time. And attendees of the Mountain Madness dance event could go to some of the storytelling events as part of our ticket for the weekend-long dance. And we went to one of the theaters in downtown Jonesborough, and there was a gentleman named Mitch performing under the title Granddaddy Junebug. He told some beautiful stories and poetry from memory. And I was entranced because I hadn't seen such a thing since I was a child. In public school all over the USA, it seemed every year or two the school would bring in a storyteller. One of the storytellers who came to perform when I was a very small child was quite famous at the time. He was the voice actor who performed as Sebastian the Crab in the animated version of The Little Mermaid, and he told such fun stories when I was a little kid. Then encountering this as an adult, I just didn't even know this was something that adults could attend and do until 2012. Friends saw how much I was falling in love with it and introduced me to the person who was, at the time, head of the storytelling program at East Tennessee State University, Dr. Joseph Sobel. He and I struck up a friendship. He would come through Chicago a lot and perform with his cittern at this Irish pub. And it just turned out that there were all of these connections and friends who were part of the storytelling world. And so I've just been in and out of it ever since. Person who grew up intensely in church world, the white evangelical megachurch movement of the late 90s, early 2000s. My mother directed and produced one of the largest live week-long Easter passion plays in the world. And in that world, the performance and storytelling of a Sunday service is just a natural part of the rhythm of being a church-going person, and experiencing this in a different way outside of the megachurch just settled in my gut in a way that was very comforting and like homecoming of how I fell in love with storytelling.
Well, religion is storytelling, isn't it?
Oh, yes, I think so.
And how were you able to move through the evangelical experience, and where do you sit now with it?
I was a very genuine, sincere, and earnest believer through my childhood into my adulthood. I have intentionally tried to hold on to that sincerity while also trying to temper it with some wisdom, being a little bit more careful. I threw myself into missions work when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. I served with the Moravian Board of World Mission in Honduras, teaching public health. I served a number of times in northwestern Romania, working with juvenile delinquents on things like literacy, doing the basic hygiene, feeding, clothing of children who had been abandoned, and starting a kindergarten for Roma kids in a little Roma village outside of the city of Oradea. And I can look back on that and still feel good, feel satisfied about the work that I did, focusing on things like literacy, education, and basic human needs, food, clothing, shelter, dealing with scabies, dealing with lice. I was really throwing myself into that and trying to figure out how to, as a genuine believer, if I just follow what I've been told of Jesus, then we'll make the world a better place and everyone will love each other. What a glorious notion. And therefore, when I was told not to store treasures, not to worry about my life, aren't the flowers dressed beautifully each day, so don't worry about what you will eat and what you will drink and what you will wear, I took that a little too literally, and I ended up flat broke a lot. I went to graduate school. I studied biblical exegesis and dead languages, Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, dabble in a little Latin. By that time, I'd also studied Spanish and Romanian and a little German. I was born in Germany. I have video of me speaking German. I don't remember it so well anymore, though I'm working on it. I became a qualified Bible translator, and I was recruited by Wycliffe Bible Translators, which is one of the big ones, to be an international multi-team supervisor. In a lot of nonprofit, religious, mission-oriented models, the notion is that the worker full-time fundraises their entire salary and full-time does their whole job. And they really didn't have any sort of training or plan or system for that. If you can fundraise your entire salary entirely by yourself, then you can come work for us. Congratulations, which is how they do it for everyone. It's not just me. Though I do sometimes wonder, was there no plan, was there no system based on some of the conversations I had with Wycliffe reps who reached out to me? It's not something that I could write a quote down for you and say, see, look, here it is. But it was a general sense that I had that was inferred from the conversation. As a solo living, unmarried woman, isn't your father or someone taking care of that? Like the idea that someone else should be paying for my life seemed to be an undercurrent of the conversation, which was very uncomfortable. So I did not go that route. For a time, I explored continuing in first Christian academia and then just general secular academia because I'd so fallen in love with the study of ancient history and ancient languages. And frankly, I thought, I might not want to do a PhD in theology. I might want to be an ancient historian. I couldn't figure out how people practically live doing that. Like, where does the money come from? Some programs would have a stipend that would equate to something like $25,000 a year, which even back in 2011 was incredibly difficult to survive on. At the same time, I was also training for the priesthood in an Anglican tradition that had not yet become the Anglican Church of North America, a new denomination as of 2012 or 2013, I think. For me, that was taking ownership of and responsibility for the faith of my birth, the faith I'd been brought up in. And I've served on the mission field and I've served in the church and got to the point with this big cathedral church that I was working at. 1,100 people came every Sunday. It was huge. You know, I had keys to this giant cathedral building and I looked around and said, I can do everything that needs to be done for this service every week except preside over the Eucharist. And I was on path to the priesthood. I was a subdeacon at the time and entering a liturgical tradition, which is quite different from the megachurch tradition, was claiming the ancient roots of the faith. I was becoming more and more aware of how I was being taken advantage of for my labor. I was a subdeacon, but the process to go through the steps of ordination, I was becoming more and more unsettled about what was going on with that denomination. It was becoming more closed off, and they don't, in all of their churches, welcome the ordination of women anymore. And they were headed that way at the time. After working for parts of that church organization, the Anglican Church of North America, I'll wrap that up with these 2 points. The first clergy appointment I ever made was to complain about their child safety policies. I had been a preschool teacher. I had dealt with some sad and difficult situations with some of my students. And when I went through this big cathedral's child safety course, which I'm glad they had for their volunteers, like that's a good thing to have, I found some areas of lack and some requirements that I disagreed with, which essentially you're setting up people to just sign this paper and lie. This sort of honor system doesn't work, and also this is not sufficient. This is not okay. And they were so pleased with my involvement that they said, oh, we welcome you in these volunteer areas. The undercurrent was, oh yes, we'll get right on that, which of course they never did. And the last thing I did when I left that organization is I wrote an official letter of complaint on their official letterhead, put it in everyone's mailboxes. That just felt more official to me for some reason, to complain about some of their financial policies that I had noticed that were impacting me and impacting others. And then I left. I walked away and left. 4 years later, they were in national religion news for abuse scandal and financial scandal. The worst I told you so ever. I wish that were not so, because people got horribly hurt. And there's now a hashtag out there, hashtag ACNA2, TOO. And that was the end of my journey of church work. I went as far as I could go. I really thought I was called to the priesthood, but maybe in a different way. I'm called to serve this notion of a great loving cosmic force, a great loving creator, maybe not with a collar.
As you move through your life and as your relationship to the church shifted, changed, you matured, you had different ideas, or you included different ideas in the original belief, how much of that belief changed inside of you versus the belief that you were encouraged to accept from outside of you?
I would say that the part of the big journey of my 20s was allowing myself to fully embrace the actual sort of sweet and naive belief of my childhood, which is, if there's a God, then God loves everybody. When I was a little kid, I used to pray for the devil because I thought that wouldn't that solve everything? If God would just forgive the devil, then we could all just love each other. And can't God forgive everyone? So why does there have to be a hell? That doesn't make any sense to me. That doesn't make any sense. I would ask these kind of questions when I was a little kid, and these old ministers, which who knows how old they were. As a little kid, everybody seems old, right? They would pat my head and say, oh, this one asks the questions we asked in the seminary, and say, oh, what a bright spiritual child. You didn't answer my question, though. Thinking, wishing that there was an answer. And I would say that I became more what would presently be called a progressive Christian in my 20s. Of a lot of ancient Christians didn't actually believe in a permanent tormenting hell. That was not required. Maybe a purgatory situation, like everybody needs to be purged of what ails their spirit, and maybe what ails their spirit is hatred or whatever that might be. Through my 30s, I wrestled with not really feeling a part of any collective, of any particular church, any particular organization anymore. Particularly, I was 32 or 33 when I walked away from the path of ordination, when I threw out my aspirancy paperwork when you're aspiring to the priesthood. And then I had some calamities. A man done me wrong, real bad. My life plan, my resources. We were to be married and move to Germany together. And instead, we were in pandemic isolation. He tormented me and gaslit me all to hell. And the scary, sad thing about the play Gaslight is that it works. A wealthy woman has a husband who psychologically torments her to try to make her feel crazy. And it works. She believes that she is, and she checks herself into a mental institution so that he can have control of her fortune. Something kind of like that happened to me. The blanket term that I use is I had severe neurological injury. It was like my nervous system was all frayed wires for a while. I lost the ability to read, really. I struggled to read an email. And as I mentioned, I had studied in many languages, so that was really scary. My whole neurochemistry was changing. One morning, I woke up and it felt like getting the wind knocked out of you. It was like I can't sense my spirituality at all. It's gone. This is like an empty echo chamber. It was so sad. It wasn't like one big thing had happened in that moment. All of the sad things had happened months before, and I was in a recovery phase. I had ended up in the hospital because I was very unwell. I was red in the face, shaking, sweating all the time, unable to sleep for a full week. So I had to be checked in and get that taken care of, because you can't go a whole week without sleeping. And I had a broken ankle, and it was all just a mess. And when I got out of the hospital, I had been very well taken care of, and was beginning to learn some things about my neurochemistry to better take care of myself. And I was there with one of my best friends and the fiance who had disappeared for a few days and then reemerged and was holding my hand and kissing my forehead. And I looked at them and I said, I think I'm going to be well. And I couldn't discern their facial expression at the time. But looking back, now I know what that facial expression meant. Because within, I think, 2 days, he sent an email and left the country. He ran off. I was a couple days out of the hospital. A dear friend of mine who's like a big sister to me, when I told her that story, she looked at me and said, it took a global pandemic for him to do that to you. He never could have gotten away with it in your full power. And when he saw you were going to recover and be well, he knew he was in big trouble. And so he ran because he's a coward, which was a very kind thing for her to say. And I received that. And it was all very sad. I had lost my whole life plan that I'd worked for years. That shift caused me to lose touch with that sense of being connected to a great cosmic spirit, if you will. I learned later, I have something called synesthesia, the crisscrossing of your senses in the brain, sense of taste, sense of smell, or sense of sight. For people with synesthesia, those pathways never fully differentiate. I see colors when I hear music. It is a neutral thing, but after a big traumatic event, some of those extrasensory inputs can be lost. And I did experience that. I didn't have any of this language. I didn't know what was happening. It felt like parts of me had been chopped off. It felt like God had left me. A few years later, I understand this is what was happening at a neurological level. I turned to friends who are in alternative spirituality. I turned to friends who are into oracle cards and hippie witchcraft. And I turned to my atheist friends. And thankfully, I'm one of those people who has friends of a lot of different perspectives. And I did reach out to a progressive Lutheran minister, and I just directly asked him, I feel no sense of connection to God anymore. I might be an atheist now. I don't know. Does this happen to people after like a big sad time? And he said, yeah, this is really common in my experience. I encourage you to explore other areas of spirituality. Give yourself another way to find your way back to what is healthy for you. And that's where I am right now. I am still deeply connected to the sacred stories of my culture, of my upbringing. The language I've come to right now is that mythopoetics is my religion, that the stories that we put in our hearts are the stories that shape our worldview. At the storytelling festival this weekend, one of the storytellers told a fairy tale in which a father has great success on a trip, and to give thanks for his great successful trip, and he's like a wealthy, prosperous baron or count or something, he promises the gods whatever first appears when he arrives home. He's thinking a dog, a horse. It is his young daughter. And so he must give his daughter away to the magical being because he's made this promise. That shows up in the Hebrew scriptures. That's the story of Jephthah's daughter, where he promises to sacrifice whatever first greets him when he gets home. Now, nobody asked him to do that. And this shows up in fairy tales. This shows up all over the world. That's a weird, violent story. So you're going to sacrifice your young daughter because she was excited to see you and ran out the front door first? Maybe think things through first. Or maybe when you make a promise, you can have a conversation after and say, I didn't consider all the possibilities. Right now, in this phase of my life, I'm still on my journey of figuring out what's next. Do I believe in God? Well, it depends on the day and the hour.
What is an atheist?
So, theist, being the negating letter, not a theist, not ascribing the workings of the universe to any invisible supernatural force. But I think of an atheist as more of there isn't any supernatural force. I don't know if I ever would be a true atheist. Why not give yourself that? Why not believe that you and I met this weekend for some sort of magical reason?
I'm curious about the word supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
We hear that a lot, the supernatural forces, which implies the low-octane natural. Why would anything be considered supernatural? Or flipping it, why wouldn't everything be supernatural?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to be super? We are hierarchical creatures. So I'm going to put this up here and this down here. I'm down here in the low octane natural world. There's nothing supernatural about me and about what's around me, nothing supernatural about my ancestors or my family or my house. The things I can't see are the supernatural.
What we currently consider the supernatural is maybe just what we don't have the language to explain to ourselves. And there are so many things about everyday life that can seem so magical. So years ago, I was at the St. Louis Balloon Glow, which is when all the hot air balloon people gather in the biggest park in St. Louis, Forest Park. It's beautiful. Highly recommend visiting. And they light up all of their balloons at nightfall, and you get all the beautiful colors and the flames whooshing. And then at some point they alight into the air. It's a lovely event. And I was there with a friend, and suddenly the St. Louis bagpipers came out in the middle of all these glowing hot air balloons, and they're performing, and a big oval of people have gathered around the bagpipers. And I look across the group and I see this young lady, and she has her hands straight down on her sides with her fists sort of balled up, and her right foot is slightly in front of her left foot, and her toe is slightly pointed. And I just wave across this oval past the bagpipers, and I point at her, and I put my arms and my feet in the same position. She and I just nod at each other. And they were Scottish Highland pipers. She and I looked at each other, and from across the oval, having never met, we waited until the top of the phrase of what the bagpipers were playing, and we started an Irish knot dance. It turns out we were both former Irish dancers. Soft shoe, not hard shoe. We were in the grass. And so me and this stranger just start doing this Irish dance, and people are clapping. And when the pipers notice us, they start making sure that they're playing along in time. They recognize what the dance is. And so when their tune comes to an end, it comes to the nice end of the dance, and everybody cheers. And I shake her hand, and we give each other a hug. And I never saw her again. You know, as human beings, when we hear music and we dance together, our respiration and our heartbeats can start to sync up. We don't fully understand how that mechanism works. And who knows, maybe we'll run into each other again.
And wouldn't it be fair to say that that did have exciting, magical qualities about it because it happened between a group of people? Wouldn't it also be fair to say that it was simply part of the ordinary harmony of being?
I used to preach about this when I was in the church, and in small groups, of course, not up at the pulpit, because they weren't having women do that. In Luke 17 and 18, that's where we get this passage about the rapture, two people grinding wheat next to each other, and one of them is taken and one of them is left behind, which is more about how life is really scary, and sometimes God seems so transcendent and so far away, but in the everyday, God can also seem very imminent and very near. And it's that back and forth, that both and, that the everyday is cosmic, loving, magical experience. One of the things that I still very much hold on to and still have a great desire to keep learning and exploring are the practices of our spiritual heritages that give us opportunities to expand our minds into these creative, imaginative spaces. So years ago, I ran into a dancer who I saw without the big skirt, but doing a whirling dervish. And I said to him, I've always wanted to learn how to do that. He said, well, I can teach you right now if you like. Because we were already dancers in other forms. And said, you know, this is a meditative practice for some people in the world. That practice I've carried with me, and I'm fortunate to be able to go to some lovely ecstatic dance events. There's plenty of space, plenty of room, plenty of freedom to practice the whirling dervish, and how that opens up your mind, calms your body, takes away the distractions of, oh, did I leave the gas on? How many days do I have left to pay that bill? No, I'm doing the whirling dervish, and now I'm thinking about the universe. And one of the things that I've dabbled in is learning about the lives and legends of the saints and how wild and wily some of their stories are. St. Clare of St. Francis and St. Clare has a really fun legend in that she was a very beautiful, young, wealthy woman who felt called to live her life as a nun, and her family did not want this. They wanted to marry off their beautiful daughter to create strong financial and military alliances and so forth. She and her equally beautiful sister ran off to the convent to live a life of, frankly, for women, what was greater freedom, living as a nun. And she famously created the first religious order rules of life for women in the official processes of the Roman Catholic Church. She's left such a lovely heritage for people, but on her journey of trying to escape her family, trying to force her into arranged marriage, they hired some thugs to go steal their daughters back from the convent in this legend. And it is the legend of the miraculous heaviness, because young Claire and her sister, when the thugs broke into the convent to steal them back to their family home and force them into marriage, the legend goes that their bodies became so heavy, this band of thugs couldn't lift them. They laid down on the ground and they could not be lifted, that God supernaturally made their bodies enormously heavy. And eventually the thugs wore themselves out to panting and sweating and couldn't pick them up and had to return to the wealthy people who hired them, having failed in their task. And eventually the family gave up and let the daughters go. And there are so many wild stories like that. Like St. Julian of Norwich of England, one of her quotes came up at the Storytelling Festival this weekend. A storyteller was telling a story of a magical frog, a frog who would say, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And I went up to him after he told his story and I said, I think St. Julian of Norwich would have really liked your story. And he said, her visions that she's written, she had wild visions when she was in the throes of a terrible fever that create these sort of magical sounding stories that, frankly, a lot of Christians today would look at this and say, that's witchcraft, and would be quite fearful of it when these are the ancestors of the tradition. These various practices, all these different ones, speaking in tongues is a way to relieve the limbic system. It bypasses your language processing center and gives your frightened, angry, animalistic self a voice to just babble in syllables. People feel so much better afterwards. They feel relieved. And the way that this allows people to have experiences that are similar to when people are, frankly, on drugs, like mind-altering substances. I have experienced those mind-altering states from things like prayer and meditation in my life. Years ago, I'd had a very particular daily practice of 30-minute prayer and meditation every day for like 6 months. And then I went to a dance event and I walked out into this field and it was a new moon. So it was very, very dark, but the stars were so brilliant because there was no moon to compete with. The whisper of the music was still floating out of the dance hall, even though I was quite far away in this field. And to me, from my perspective, I was out there the moment the fireflies lifted from the grass, like when they woke up for the start of their day. And I had this beautiful experience where I felt like I was dancing in the sky with the stars. And it was very trippy, very what I imagined, though certainly I would never do such a thing as psilocybin, certainly not. I imagine, and from the stories I've heard, that it's a very similar thing. It was like a wild, trippy experience when I was perfectly sober, because I'd had this daily practice for many, many months of training my mind to be open.
I would like for you to take a few moments to reflect on the idea of our imaginative intelligence. When you hear that term, what does that do for you in terms of connection? Imaginative intelligence, does that have a meaning for you?
It does. When we create some of the stories of our culture, for me, I was a Star Trek kid. I grew up on Star Trek, particularly The Next Generation. huge fan of Patrick Stewart, of course, the voice of my childhood. What is that if not imaginative intelligence, thinking about what would humanity look like centuries from now? The movie Interstellar, as far as I understand it from what I've read, in the making of that movie, a big part of the plot is a black hole. And in working with NASA scientists with the timing of and the money of making the film, they were able to get an even more accurate image of what a black hole actually looks like. And so by creatively imagining a story unfolding with the future of humanity, we made further progress in scientific discovery. And without our creative imagination of what if we build and innovate, animals have the beautiful gift of presence. The cat I'm looking at right now is not wondering about what happens in the afterlife. The gift of presence is a lovely thing, but also our ability to imagine the future, to plan, and to come up with the fantastical is what allows us to innovate things that have changed the world, like the story of insulin, the story of the day that insulin had been tested enough on different animals, particularly dogs, that they went into a children's home where children were in comas and had not woken up for ages. And it was assumed that they would just remain in that coma until they slowly slipped away and perished. And when, I might cry just thinking about it, because it's such a beautiful idea. The first group of children to receive insulin and how they came back to life. They woke up because these scientists imagined, what if this diabetes that seems to be killing our adults and children, what if we could defeat it? What if we could bring them back to life? What if they weren't gone now forever to slip from that coma into death? Without our imaginations, how could we save each other? I'm a software architect and solutions engineer. And I returned to tech after about 10 years in the nonprofit, religious education space. And if you've studied ancient languages, if you studied Hebrew, Greek, you're already working in other alphabets, you're working in other markings outside of the typical English alphabet, and you're reading and writing things that nobody speaks aloud anymore conversationally. So that's very transferable to the world of code. And when I go in for a whiteboard interview, there's a little trick that I do. And so I'll need you to use your imagination here for a second, as folks are listening and we aren't able to write this. Here's how this transfers. I write on the whiteboard a capital G, a capital M, and a capital L. GML. See if you can picture that in your mind. Say, okay, there's a word in both Hebrew and Aramaic called gamal. It's very easy for English speakers to remember. That's the word for camel. And I write a teeny tiny a on either side of the M. So G, tiny a, M, tiny a, L, gamal. Okay, so in Hebrew and Aramaic, gamal, camel. Nobody worry that we don't have to call HR. This is not a religious lesson. This is just a history and language lesson. There's a story in the Bible where Jesus says, you have strained out the gnat and left behind the camel. You're focusing on the wrong things. Imagine putting a camel and a gnat through a sieve, and you strain out the gnat, but you leave behind this whole giant camel. It's funny. It's a goofy visual. But in Aramaic, and I take the second teeny tiny a and I move it over to the other side of the L. It's gone from gamal to gamla. I say, you move one little mark, and I'm doing this in English letters for you, and I can, if you want me to draw it in the other alphabet, I can do that for you too if you want to see it. But this one little mark, and then I do write it in the Aramaic letters for them because it looks cool and it's fun to see when it's not a language system that's familiar to you, and it's pretty. So you just move this one little mark over here, and it's a different noun now. So not only is the little reference, you've strained out the gnat and left behind the camel, a funny visual, but it's also a clever turn of phrase in that language. You've strained out the gamla and you've left behind the gamal. And moving that one little mark completely changes what this noun is. So I think I can manage writing some code for you where that colon versus semicolon makes a really big difference in the world of code. One little mark can break your entire method, your entire paragraph of code. So those skills are very similar. They're next door neighbors. And that's one of my little tricks I do in a whiteboard interview to try to communicate to people who are entirely tech people. I'm very thankful for my work in code. Since 2020, I've been a remote worker. I absolutely love working remotely. I feel like I get to concentrate more fully. For me, the distractions of an office, getting dressed up in office attire each day, arranging your face in a concentrated yet pleasant expression, all of that distracted me from the actual work itself. So I love remote work. I love that aspect of the profession and the freedom that it gives and the way that we can just collaborate online together. At the same time, it has opened even more doors of information for me about how little people know about how to use some of these tools. And so I'll use an analogy. When I was in college back in the early 2000s, I was a Spanish major and a psychology major with minors in chemistry and musical theater. I was a modern foreign language tutor. That was one of my campus jobs. And people were bringing me their homework and their papers, and I got bad marks on this, and I don't know why, and the professor told me to rewrite it. And those were the early days of having online translation tools available. At the time, it was Alta Vista language translator, if you can remember that one. And as a foreign language tutor, I'd receive these students' assignments and look at them and say, okay, you typed this out and then you plugged it into Alta Vista and hit translate. You didn't do it. How do you know that? I can tell. Well, how do you know that? Because I had to actually learn the grammar rules of Spanish for myself. And the way you've structured this is the way a literal wooden fumbling poor translation of English to Spanish would go. So, for example, in English, we say you can do something. I can get that for you. I can finish that assignment for you. But the dictionary translation of that word in Spanish, poder, to be able to, if you're going to plug that into a translations online software, online tool, you would need to say, I am able to do that for you. Because if you say, I can do that for you, its default dictionary translation, particularly in the early 2000s at the time, is going to translate that like a tin can, like a can of soup. So you're going to have, I, noun, tin can of soup, do that for you. Very obviously, you plugged this into a translation tool online and you didn't go back and correct it. You didn't edit it at all. And it shows me you don't understand how to even translate in your mind into English. We don't say my mother's house. We say the house of my mother in Spanish because we don't have that apostrophe-s contraction in Spanish grammar. And some of them would be looking at me like bashful, like, yeah. And some of them would be looking at me wide-eyed, like, I don't understand. It's like, okay, so let's go over some paradigms. Let's go over some conjugations and get to the root first. And then you can see, we're going to correct this paper together, and you'll see where the translation online went awry. And what I didn't tell some of these students, and it's been 20 years now, so I think I'm in the clear, is that sometimes if I was in a hurry, I would do it. I would write out my assignment in English in the form, the house of my mother on the street of my uncle, put that into the software or the online tool, print it out with my red pen, go correct it. No, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Type it up again, turn it in, get my A. Because I was using it as a shortcut for what I already knew how to do. A shortcut for what I already understood and knew how to do when I was in too much of a hurry because I was holding down 3 jobs with 2 majors and 2 minors and Sometimes I just took a shortcut, which we can argue about the ethics of that later. But did I do the work? Yes, I think I did. And I was using these online tools to make my work more expedient because I already knew how to correct the tool. I sometimes use AI for my job now because that is the way the industry is going. If I staunchly dig my heels in and say, no, I don't want to, then I'm going to be left behind. I need to get myself in the practice of learning how to use these tools safely. Maybe if I make my mistakes, make them early on with everybody else. So I'm not learning and making my mistakes later when everybody else in the industry has already moved on and figured that out. Tools like ChatGPT, OpenAI, they make mistakes all the time. They make up stuff. I once asked for my own personal use, will you give me a reading list on these topics? And then I went through and I looked up each one and I responded back to it, each time feeling a level of, how much water did I just use making this inquiry? Of this list, I found this portion of your list in libraries and bookstores and so on online. This portion, this author, this title doesn't exist. ChatGPT, did you make those up because I asked you for a list of 30 books and you wanted to achieve the 30 and you could only find 21? Did you make up 9 titles? And it'll come back, you're right. It seems I did make up those titles. Let's see if we can find some others. Yeah. Whereas I worry some folks don't realize, say, if you ask ChatGPT to create a bibliography for you, you got to triple check that thing like it's a freshman student who's just bumbling through and trying to please the teacher but doesn't actually know what it's doing. It's my understanding that when the brotopia of Silicon Valley created the smartwatches that help monitor some of your health needs, your pulse, your maybe blood pressure. I don't know what smartwatches monitor. I haven't gotten into it. But because of their testing processes and their unidentified, unacknowledged biases, those smartwatches for health monitoring don't do a good job for people who aren't white because they use too much about skin color to do that health monitoring. It's like the majority of the human population doesn't have this pale see-through skin color that I'm looking at right now. Did y'all not think of that? No, they didn't. And they're creating this air quotes smart technology full of their own biases. And so I'll wrap that up with an allusion to the fun show, The Mandalorian, which I thought was really fun. I especially liked the first season. And I grew up on Star Trek and Star Wars as well. So I've been really enjoying what the Star Wars folks have been doing in recent years. There's a little creature, a little guy whose key phrase is, I have spoken. And he lives on the planet where little baby Yoda is discovered, a cute little baby Yoda puppet. And he has this philosophy around droids. They're hyper-intelligent technology, that droids are a neutral expression of the engineer who created that droid. If that droid is a violent assassin droid, then that was a reflection of the creator. If that droid is a benevolent nurse droid, then that droid is a reflection of its creator. So with the timeline of AI moving forward so rapidly, some of my trepidation, some of my concern is around who are the creators? And as we use these tools, do we recognize that we are reflecting back the values of the people who created these tools? And for me, as a software architect and solutions engineer, I do the job that the business has asked me to do. And I fulfill the requirements that they have asked of me. And I try to design it as best I can to both suit the needs of the client and to make something good that I'm proud of. On the flip side, that means I am not necessarily doing all the things I want to do. I'm doing the things that I'm paid to do. And that is true of the people who are creating AI as well. The business interests of the folks who are paying for it are the values that we are reflecting back and forth to each other. And so as we move forward, my hope is that people are increasingly aware of that. In the same way that a smartwatch is not actually going to accurately help monitor the health of someone with very dark skin, that is a bias and a loss of human potential for greater achievement in taking care of one another's health because of either blindness or maybe blatant racism. I don't know. I wasn't there. That is reflected in the technology. Those similar biases, either unacknowledged or fully blatantly acknowledged. Is it a sadness and blindness of one's upbringing, or is it a blatant hatred? It can be the full spectrum. That's in our AI as well. So I suppose my really simple conclusion to that is just be careful. Be careful. We're reflecting back and forth the values of the very heavily moneyed people who created these tools.
And so, Lo, on that note, I believe we've arrived at the end of our time together. I want to thank you for taking us through the dimensions, the many dimensions, the beginning journey.
We swim and fly through them. Yes.
So anyway, thanks for being on Twice 5 Miles Radio.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Lo Ziv. So often when I have these interviews and conversations, I just stumble across people like I did with Lo at the Storytelling Festival. It's always a pleasure just to find people who want to tell stories and not spend all that much time trying to look for them. Which brings me around to the topic I'd like to discuss in the last bit of time we have together. And that topic is how to connect with a great deal of people by only connecting with one person. So Lo and I met. I didn't know her. She started to talk to me about all the things she had a lot of interest in, and I started asking her questions about those things she was interested in. And what I've discovered, when you ask people questions you are genuinely curious about, and you know they know something about, you're almost 100% guaranteed to have an engaging conversation with that person. And it's the questions that make those conversations move forward, along with your curiosity, genuine curiosity, and along with their enthusiasm, whatever the subject happens to be, the enthusiasm they have for that subject. And one of the things to keep in mind, if you are a very shy person, and you may be one of those shy people, not sure exactly how to engage in a group of people or one-on-one with somebody you just met, a stranger, the best way to do it is to pay close attention to what the people around you are saying, or the one person you've just met. Pay close attention to what that person is saying, and when you do, you will find they will give you a good deal of information about themselves that will inspire a number of questions. I've discovered all you have to do is find a couple of entry points by way of what someone is saying and ask a broad-based question that is inspired by the topics they're touching on or what they're telling you about themselves. And when you do that, there's a great joy in watching their eyes light up. And they will smile, and they will brighten all across their face with this nice look of surprise, because most of the time in our comings and goings in our culture, people don't stop and take the time to actually inquire, to appreciate what someone else brings to the table. Keep in mind that it's easy to be dazzled or to really appreciate some outstanding story someone tells, something really interesting. Oh, such an interesting person I just met. Well, think about this. What if you assumed that everything someone is getting ready to say has the potential to be, quote unquote, interesting. The simple things, because it's not the subject that's interesting, it's how the person engages what makes them curious, what excites them, even if it's really, really simple and ordinary. I've been thinking a lot about what I call the beautiful ordinary. So much around us seems commonplace, especially if you are in a home that you've been in for a while, or you're in an environment that you grew up in and you've seen all the time. If you live in Taos, New Mexico, and you grew up in Taos, New Mexico, you're used to looking at the mountains. You're used to watching the sun come up every day. It's absolutely exquisite, and yet it's commonplace. You also tend to notice how beautiful it is, and maybe sometimes you don't. Maybe sometimes you're in a hurry. You're going into town to go shopping at Smith's Grocery or Albertsons or to Sid's Grocery, and you turn to the left or to the right. You find your parking place and you scurry into the store, you get what you need, and you come back out to your car and you drive home. All of the things that you're surrounded with are the ordinary things of life. Maybe you meet somebody in the store, at the salad bar, and you say hi. Maybe you haven't seen them in many years. And you brighten up and say, hi, how are you? Tell me what your life is all about today. And you can do that in front of any salad bar in the world. You can do that anywhere in the world. The point is to appreciate the small things, the lower case. I don't tell people I'm a writer. I say I write. I don't tell people I'm a podcaster. I say I make podcasts and broadcast them over a couple of radio stations. So this is, to me, the essential strategy for making significant meaning in the world. Allowing yourself to appreciate the beautiful ordinary. When you do that, every person you encounter can fit into that ordinariness of things. And in that ordinary, there's something so magical about it. It relieves you of the pressure of being important and allows you to actually embrace what is important, which is everything around you, wherever you are. So when I was sitting there with Lo having our conversation, and lively as it was, I was looking around at the leaves outside. There was a dog coming in and out of its cage. It barked a few times. There was some sunlight on the table. We had tea getting cool in front of us. All of that was at play. So when you are engaging your life and you're thinking about all of these things you can do, keep in mind every person you encounter is just waiting for you to ask them a question, something simple. Take it maybe beyond, how are you? I will often ask people to tell me something I need to know. It's a funny way of phrasing it. Hey, how are you? Hey, Bill, what's up? Please do tell me something I need to know. So you're inviting the person to make a decision around sharing something they know with something that they think you might want to know. And when that happens, there's a softness that comes. There's information exchanged. The invitation is there to take in things, to know things you didn't already know. There's a great deal to be said for all of the things that we have out there waiting for us to learn. And that's why it is important to value whomever happens to be in front of you. I've heard people say this more than once. I'll say it in closing. The most important person in the world is the one right in front of you. And you really don't have to do much in order to respect that importance. All you have to do is be aware of it, recognize it, and engage it without a whole lot of judgment. Even though we do judge all the time, I judge how far it is to the stop sign. I judge how long I need to sit before I stand up. I make a judgment of how I want to interact with people. All that's at play. But in the moment of meeting someone, you allow yourself to remove as much of the judgment as you can and just take that person for face value. And when you do that, you'll find your life will be richer because that person will give you something you didn't have before you encountered that person, just like Lo did with me. So I really appreciate that, and I wish you were here to have a conversation with me. It's a one-way street when you do a radio show. I'm here, you're there, I can speak, and you really can't interact with me unless you email me, Navé@jamesnavé.com. If you have anything to say, I'd love to hear it. And on that note, we have arrived at the last part of what we're going to do this time, which is end the show. Thanks for listening to Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I'm your host, James Navé. We air this show every weekend on WPVM FM in Asheville and KCEI FM, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM FM, Robin Collier for managing KCEI. I'm grateful for both of you out there doing what you do. And I'm also grateful for you listening to the show wherever you are. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. I think I'm approaching my 10th year of doing this. I've done over 400 interviews. And I still have plenty of people to go. There are only 8 billion people in the world. Imagine that. A lot of conversations, right? Anyway, thank you for cruising by, being here with me. And I do hope you come back sometime soon. And until then, maybe I'll just catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.